By the second week of February 1975, the county veterinarian out of Union Springs had put 308 miles on his truck in a single month making rounds. The fever had gone through Bullock County the way a hard winter goes through a place that wasn't ready for it. Without announcement, without slowing, without much interest in who it inconvenienced. Farmers were losing animals they'd spent years building. Horace Greer, who ran 400 acres of improved pasture along the Midway Road and had been buying Angus cattle since 1957, lost 42 head of steers between Christmas and the second week of February. His neighbor to the north, Aldous Webb, lost 61 in the same window. And then there was the Macon place on Chalk Bluff Road. 82 calves, not one lost. Titus Macon was 73 years old and sitting on the porch of his house the way he sat there in September. Unhurried, watching, and the February cold did not seem to bother him. And neither did the fact that what was happening in that south pasture was happening almost exactly the way he had expected it to happen 5 months before, when a 17-year-old boy had walked out of the Bullock County sale barn with 90 sick calves that nobody else in that barn had wanted, and that the boy had bought for a total of $7. That is the end of the story. The beginning is September 14th, 1974. The beginning starts with the worst-looking lot of cattle that most of the buyers at that sale could remember coming through the ring. This is the kind of story a grandfather tells once, and a grandson carries the rest of his life. If someone taught you things that no school could have written down for them, things they learned by watching and losing and paying attention for 40 years, subscribe before we go any further. We'll keep telling stories like this one as long as you keep watching. Bullock County, Alabama sits in the Alabama Black Belt, the band of dark, productive soil across the center of the state that was named for what it could grow and what that growing cost across many generations. By 1974, the county ran mostly to cattle and row crops on land that had changed hands and changed meaning many times. Union Springs was the county seat, a town of about 3,000, and the sale barn there ran the second Saturday of the month from spring through fall, drawing buyers from Bullock, Pike, Crenshaw, and Barber counties to a ring and a set of holding pens that had been operating since the late 1940s. September in Bullock County is still summer. The heat holds through the third week of the month in most years, heavy and still. And by then the fescue pastures have gone dry and pale at the tips. The sale barn smelled the way sale barns in Alabama smelled in 1974. Pine shavings and fly spray and 30 years of cattle absorbed into the timber. The crowd on September 14 ran to about 60 buyers, cattlemen mostly, running herds of 50 to 200 head. A few order buyers from out of county. A couple of men from Pike County who came every month and almost never bid on anything. The auctioneer was a man named Tate Renfro, who had been working that ring for 11 years and who could run a pen of yearlings through in under 2 minutes on a good morning. Ezra Macon arrived at 8:30, an hour before the sale opened, and went to look at the cattle. He was 17 years old. He drove a 1961 Ford pickup that had been his grandfather's, cab smelling of old work, 3 on the tree shifted by feel. And he had never bought cattle at auction before. He had watched Titus do it twice, years back, and he had learned from the watching. Titus had not told him what to watch for. He had told him where to stand so he could see. The lot was in the back pen, separated from everything else. The barn crew had moved them there without being asked, because calves with respiratory disease spread what they're carrying, and separation is the practical thing. 90 head. Mixed breed. Mostly Hereford Angus crosses, averaging 250 to 280 pounds on the hoof. They had come off a truck from Mississippi 2 days earlier, consigned by a dealer who had bought them from a farm being dispersed and priced them at whatever the market would bear, which at their current condition was understood by everyone to be very little. The nasal discharge was visible from 10 feet. The cough was audible from 20. Several calves stood with their heads slightly lowered, the posture that means breathing is costing more than it should. A few had separated themselves from the rest entirely and stood at the far corner of the pen. The gate card read, "Distress sale. Buyer assumes all risk." Horace Greer came through the back pen on his morning walk at 8:50 and looked at the lot for 30 seconds. He had 40 years of buying and selling cattle behind those 30 seconds. He moved on. He did not see Ezra Macon come back through the pen at 9:10 and begin going through the calves one by one. Did not see him check the ears on the first calf, folded back, feeling for fever, and move to the next. Did not see him look at the eyes and the nose and the way each animal stood. Earl Dupuy, the county extension agent, was at the sale that morning and saw it, and said later he'd assumed the boy was deciding which 10 or 15 he could salvage. He had not imagined any other reading of what a person does in a pen of 90 sick calves. Levin Pate, who farmed 300 acres of improved pasture out on the Purdue Hill Road, and had known Titus Macon since they were young men together in Lowndes County, saw Ezra at the pen fence and nodded to him. He didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say about 90 coughing calves in September. When Lot 47 came into the ring, 90 had mixed, distress, buyer assumes all risk. No warranty, the barn went quiet in the particular way it goes quiet when nobody wants to be the first to do something that might turn out to be foolish. Tate Renfro opened at $20 a head. Nobody moved. He came down to 15. Nobody moved. He came down to 10. He looked around the ring. The buyers who had been in that barn long enough to recognize a distress lot had already moved their attention to the next pen. A few watched out of habit. Most didn't bother. From the back of the barn, Ezra Macon said, "7. Not $7 a head. $7. Tate Renfro found the voice. He found the boy. He waited the professional wait of a man who has learned not to fill silence prematurely. Nobody in the ring countered. Nobody moved. "Sold," Tate Renfro said. $7. He moved on to Lot 48 with the same tone he would have used for any lot. Horace Greer had been standing near the gate. He turned and found the boy who had bid. He watched him walk to the clerk's window. He watched him write the check. He watched him go back to the holding pens and start loading calves onto the borrowed truck. 3 trips. The calves coming on with the reluctant, uncertain shuffle of animals that don't feel well. He watched Dupuy watching too. Neither of them said anything to the other about it. There wasn't much to say. Horace Greer had seen a lot of purchases at that sale over the years. He had seen bad ones and surprising ones, and 1 or 2 that turned out different from how they looked. He did not know yet which category this one was. He filed it away in the place where things go when you don't have a folder for them yet. Titus Macon had been watching cattle take sick and recover, and take sick again, and die since 1933. When he was 12 years old and his father sharecropped on a piece of land outside of Hayneville in Lowndes County. He had watched it through the Depression, through the years of sharecropping, through the slow acquisition of land that came after, 2 acres, then 12, then the 47 acres on Chalk Bluff Road that he had been farming since 1959. Across all of it, he had kept observations. Not in the beginning. He didn't start writing things down until the mid-1940s, when he was old enough to recognize that what he was seeing was a pattern and not just events. He used composition books, the kind school children used, bought at the store for a nickel apiece. He wrote what he noticed about which calves got sick, and how they acted when sick, and which ones came back and which ones didn't, and what the conditions were in each case, and what he had done or not done. 41 years of that, by September of 1974. 9 composition books on the shelf above the kitchen table. He had noticed a thing: calves that had been through the respiratory sickness, that had coughed hard through a week or 2 of fever and come out the other side, still standing, still eating. Those calves were, in his repeated observation, more difficult to kill than calves that had never been sick. Not always. Not in every case. But in pattern across the years and the outbreaks and the hard winters, often enough that he had stopped treating it as coincidence and started treating it as information. He called them tried calves, not tried in the legal sense. Tried the way iron is tried, put to a test, found to be what it claimed. He had seen a similar pattern twice in the 1940s, once in 1952, and once in the winter of 1961, when a respiratory outbreak moved through Bullock and Crenshaw counties, and he had lost 4 calves out of 22, while neighbors with healthy-looking stock lost considerably more. Nobody at the time attributed the difference to anything in particular. They attributed it to luck, which is what people do when the explanation doesn't fit any category they've been offered. By the 1960s, some of what Titus had observed on his own had found language in the extension publications out of Tuskegee, the agricultural research that had been coming out of Booker T. Washington's original vision for decades, serving black Alabama farmers who for most of that time had been excluded from the white-run county extension offices and had built their own networks of knowledge in parallel. Titus had read those publications since the 1950s. Some of what he read confirmed what he already knew. Some of it gave him vocabulary he didn't have. He appreciated the vocabulary. He had already learned the thing. When the listing appeared in the farm paper in the first week of September 1974, 90 mixed calves, distress sale, respiratory, Bullock County sale barn, Titus read it at the kitchen table and read it again and called Ezra in from the yard. He pushed the paper across the table. "What do you see?" Ezra looked at the listing. "Sick calves. What else?" Ezra looked again. He looked up at his grandfather. "Calves that are still on their feet." Titus folded the paper. "How much money have you got?" $640. "Everything from the summer, tobacco stripping, fence work, odd jobs in Pike County." "Take 7 of it," Titus said. What Titus had taught Ezra, in the way he taught things, which was not in lectures but in observation and in the small adjustments he made when Ezra got something wrong, was the difference between sick and done. A calf that is done will not stand at the feed bunk. It stands apart from the others, back rounded, eyes glazed, unresponsive to what's around it. That calf has stopped working. A calf that is sick is still working. The cough and the fever are not the body giving up. They are the body making an argument. An animal with enough constitution to make that argument for a week and still be on its feet is an animal that may come out of it in better shape than it went in. The protocol was specific. Titus had tested it across 30 years of application. Separate the sick animals immediately. Stress kills faster than disease, and crowding spreads both. Small pen, good shade, clean water with 2 cups of sorghum molasses per 5 gallons for the energy the body needs to fight. High-quality hay, not the cheapest bale on the stack. The good hay. And then watching, every morning and evening, walking the pen, looking at each calf, reading the signs that told you which ones were moving toward something and which ones had given up. He added mullein leaf tea to the water twice a week through the first month. An old woman in Lowndes County had shown him that, Years before, when he was young, she had used it on calves and children both for respiratory trouble, and he had watched it work often enough to keep using it. He couldn't explain the mechanism. He didn't try. 8 of the 90 calves died in the first 3 weeks. He had expected to lose more than 8. The other 82 turned the corner by the end of October, started eating with purpose, started putting on weight. By November, they were indistinguishable from calves that had never been sick. Better, maybe. They had that quality that tried calves sometimes have, a settled, unconcerned manner, the look of animals that have been through something and are done being bothered by it. The fever that moved through Bullock County in December of 1974 was a different strain from what the calves had carried in September. Dr. Curtis Ussery, the county veterinarian out of Union Springs, identified it as bovine respiratory syncytial virus, BRS, and confirmed that it had moved through livestock in Bullock, Crenshaw, and Pike counties by the Christmas week. It spread fast. It hit hard. A family over in Crenshaw County lost 84 head before January was out. A co-op beef operation in Pike County lost over 130. And it hit cattle that had showed no symptoms, that had been well managed and well fed, that had no obvious reason to be vulnerable. They were vulnerable anyway. Horace Greer lost his first steers the 3rd week of December. 5 head in 4 days. He called Ussery. Ussery came out and treated what he could treat with oxytetracycline and supportive care, but the disease was moving faster than the response. And by the 1st week of January, Greer had lost 37 head and was watching more for symptoms every morning before the light was fully up. He did not think about the Macon calves. Then, he did. Levin Pate mentioned it at the feed store in Union Springs in late January. Said it in passing, the way you mention something that's been sitting at the back of your mind, waiting for the right moment. The Macon boys' calves, not one down. Greer looked at him. He drove out to Chalk Bluff Road the next morning without calling ahead. The calves were in the south pasture. 82 head, scattered across the field the way healthy cattle scatter. Loosely, at ease, unconcerned, they were in good weight for February. Better weight than cattle their age had any business carrying in the middle of a disease year. Greer stopped his truck at the fence and looked at them for a long time without getting out. He almost said, "Lucky." The word was right there. He stopped it. He had 40 years in cattle, and he knew what luck looked like when it stood in a pasture in February. This wasn't the shape of luck. He got out of the truck. He walked to the porch where Titus was sitting. He stood there. He took his hat off. He said, "What did you do with those calves?" Titus looked at him. "Same thing I always do." "Would you tell me what that is?" "I'll tell anyone who wants to hear it," Titus said. Didn't figure anybody did. He told Greer about the tried calves. He told him about the separation and the molasses water and the good hay and the watching. He told him about the composition books on the shelf above the kitchen table and what was in them. He told it calmly and in full, without any particular emphasis on how long he'd been saying it to empty rooms. Horace Greer sat down on the porch step. He hadn't been invited. He sat down anyway, the way a man sits down when his legs decide he needs to think about something. He sat there a while. He looked at the pasture. He said, 42 head. Titus nodded once. Neither of them said anything else for a while. By April of 1975, Ezra Macon's 82 calves were the healthiest animals at the Bullock County spring sale. He sold 60 of them at an average of $91 per head, $5,460, against a $7 bid and a winter's worth of feed and attention. He kept 22 back as breeding stock because Titus told him to. and because he had learned not to treat that instruction as optional. His net return, after feed costs and the oxytetracycline he had bought for the 8 calves that didn't make it, and a few others who needed it, was just over $4,800. He was 17 years old. The story moved through Bullitt County the way those stories move, slowly, with some disbelief in the early going, because people do not naturally accept that what they missed was visible, and that they missed it. Horace Greer told it most accurately, because he had been wrong in a specific and measurable way, and he had enough character to say so plainly and not dress it up. Dr. Ussery noted the case in a report to the Alabama Extension Service that spring. He called it a small-scale herd that demonstrated unusual resistance during the December outbreak and suggested the management practices warranted further observation. Whether further observation followed, and what it found, he couldn't say. Titus Macon died in November of 1981, at 79, having farmed until the year before his death. He left Ezra the property and the truck and 9 composition books on the shelf above the kitchen table. Each book covered 4 to 5 years of observations, which calves got sick, which lived, which died, what the conditions were, what he had tried, what worked. Not a textbook, not a protocol for any institution to publish. Just what one man had seen over a working lifetime, written down because he believed that what you see ought to be kept. Ezra Macon is 68 years old now. He still runs cattle on the Chalk Bluff Road property. He still has the composition books. Horace Greer told the story of the Macon calves for the rest of his working life. He told it at the sale barn. He told it at the co-op. He told it wherever the subject of disease years and hard winters came up, which in Bullitt County was not infrequently. He told it accurately, including the part where he had walked past 90 sick calves without a second look and let a 17-year-old boy buy them for $7, because he, Horace Greer, 40 years in cattle, could not see what the boy saw. "I had 40 years in cattle," he said. "And I didn't know what Titus Macon knew at 12. He said it without bitterness. He said it the way a man says a thing when the truth of it has settled into him long enough that it no longer needs to be argued. There is knowledge that passes between people, and knowledge that gets written into books, and knowledge that disappears because nobody thought to ask before the person who held it died. Titus Macon wrote things down. Ezra Macon listened. And the calves in that February pasture were alive because of both of those things, and because a boy looked at 90 discarded animals and saw exactly what his grandfather had spent 40 years learning to see. Not sick. Not done. Tried.